Hi everyone. There's a couple things I'd like to go over in this video real quick. I'd like to go over VCA, clipping, bypass, and shutter. So real quick, let's talk about clipping. There's two types of clipping that you'll notice if you ever get a chance to use this console. The first type of clipping is if you have your gains turned all the way up, particularly for the internal image, VCA gain, image size, these sliders, and then these gain sliders turned all the way up, you'll notice that the abstract ends up clipping. And there's ways that you can combat that by reducing the VCA gain, which reduces everything coming internal from the console. VCA gain will not affect an external image at all. It's only affecting what the oscillators are creating. Same with X and Y gain down here. The other type of clipping that you may encounter, if I turned up master gain all the way and turned up zoom all the way, even with an external image, you end up with clipping in the output image. And the reason for that is the final stage of this console has a single-ended to differential transceiver, but it's also got Zener diodes to prevent the output from exceeding the 5 volts of the oldest standard, so hopefully attempting to protect any type of scanners that you have attached to prevent them from trying to swing wider than they're supposed to. So the output is limited to within the oldest standard. Okay, so that's clipping, and let me just give an example of that. Let me bring up oscillator 1. Let me have a seat here. Oscillator 1, and bring up the second oscillator. And I'm going to reduce the master gain, which doesn't change the fact that you're going to get clipping. And as you can see, you're already seeing it there, and I'll bring up oscillator 3. And clearly we have clipping. I mean, if I attempt to move rotation offset, it hits the barriers even harder there. So let's set that back to the middle now. If I bring VCA gain down, again, that just affects the 3 internal oscillators. Then I can get it to a point where I no longer have clipping, but yet I can still bring up the master size and not have that. At least until I hit the edges of what the differential transceiver can put out, which is within the oldest standard. And there you can see it there. So that's where it's hitting plus 5 volts, and the Zener diodes are preventing it from exceeding that. Alright, so at any rate, let me go back now to the VCA itself. The VCA is a voltage controlled amplifier, and what it's doing, it has a control voltage input which is set here. And when it's set for DC and I have the VCA gain turned up, if I have the VCA gain turned up all the way, any signal coming from the oscillator is going to get through the VCA and continue on to another part of the circuit called a voltage processor. And this is where, like I just said, we can adjust the gain there to attenuate that signal getting through the VCA or bring it back to full. Now this master gain pot is a little bit different in that it controls everything, internal and external images. These two down here again are just part of the VCA, so these would only affect the internal image, where I can individually, if I wanted to change the size of X or Y and kind of leave that permanently through a show or anything to that effect, and then I could set this the way I want it to where it would be the max signal, whether I have this slider up or down. This slider, the image size on the next panel will actually say internal image size, because once again this only affects the internal image and nothing coming external from the console. So I could, prior to a show, set all these exactly where I want it to where I don't run into clipping anywhere. And then I could use these sliders and this, which essentially when I bring all these up, this now affects all 3 at the same time. And going back to the control voltage that I'm feeding to the VCA, I can change the control voltage to one of the LFOs. So instead of it being a DC signal to the VCA saying I want maximum signal through, now I want that signal to bounce around in attenuation depending upon what the VCA, or excuse me, what the LFO is sending, what kind of signal it's receiving. So let me bring up just one of my oscillators Alright, so here we go. Now, I am going to send it a signal, control voltage signal from LFO1. LFO1 is kind of like a ramp. And if I slow that down, you can kind of see that better. It goes from one end to the other, back and forth. It's not a sine wave, it's more of a ramp. I do have the ability to adjust the symmetry of this to where it's more of a sawtooth, either a leading edge or a falling edge sawtooth, as you can see there, or turn it back the other way, where now it's coming out at you. Now I can speed this up quite a bit, and with color modulation you can create some pretty cool effects with that. And if I increase the speed of the oscillator, it's a pretty solid pattern. Now I've also got offset and gain that I can adjust from the LFO to make it do different things as well. But all of that is just because I'm feeding the control voltage signal from the LFO. Now it's sort of like amplitude modulation. So now if I change it to LFO2, LFO2 is a square wave. And as you can see, it's jumping from a full signal getting through the VCA to an attenuated signal getting through the VCA. And I can adjust that LFO speed, symmetry, as well as offset and gain. And here you can see the relationship with offset and gain. At any rate, some pretty cool effects can be created with that as well. So that's how the VCA works. It takes a little bit to get used to and understand exactly what it all does and how it functions and whatnot, but it's not too bad. Okay, moving on to the shutter. I do have a shutter switch here on the console. This basically, when it's in the down position, any signal coming from an externally connected DAC, if it tells the shutter to open, is now going to get through the console and out to the projector. If it's in the middle, then the shutter is closed, and if it's up, now the console is telling the shutter and the projector to open, regardless of what the DAC is telling it to do. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is normal and bypass. And this is actually a pretty good idea that Greg Displacer came up with. So if I have an external image coming through, and as we can see here, I have just a test pattern. Well, let's say I've gone and made a total mess of everything, like this, and I can't figure out my way back, and in the middle, let's say it's a live show. So the normal bypass is almost kind of like a panic switch. So if I flip the bypass switch, now the signal is going straight through the console and out to the projector, bypassing all of the VCAs, the voltage processors, everything. It's just coming in and going straight out to the projector. So that's totally taking the console out of the picture. And then you can flip, if you figure you can get everything back the way it should be and not a total mess, then you can flip back to normal, and now you're back to going through the voltage processors and everything else. And you can line these up to where they're roughly the same. I've got some offset there. Anyway, that's just a brief overview of the VCA, clipping, the bypass switch, and the shutter switch. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed. More videos soon.